If I was to ask you, what one thing, if people were better at, it would make the world a better place, what kinds of ideas would come to mind? I'm not asking you to call them out. I'm just going to tell you what I usually hear are things like love, compassion, forgiveness, listening skills. And all of those are true and very noble answers. But I am here to tell you today that my answer to that question is improv comedy. Yes, I believe the world needs improv. Now, that may seem like an odd sort of thing to say, so what I'm going to do is demonstrate what I mean by playing an improv comedy game right now. It's a game I'm going to play solo, but I'm going to have a volunteer help me. Now, for the sake of time and technology, I've actually pre-selected my volunteer. So in the center of the room, the lovely Sean Lee is going to help me. Let's give her a round of applause. Now, here's what's going to happen. Sean Lee has a bell. I'm going to begin telling you all a story that I make up here on the spot. Anytime she wants, she can ring the bell. When she does, I have to stop, go back, repeat what I said, but change it to something different. So for example, if my story began, once upon a time there was a girl who had a pet dog. Ding! Once upon a time there was a girl who had a pet cat. Ding! Pet mouse. Ding! Pet emu. Whatever. As long as she rings, I change. When she stops ringing, I keep going, but only as if the last thing was said. So in this example, the dog, the cat, and the mouse would be gone. We'd be left with a story about a girl and her pet emu. That's all there is to it. Now this is, even though I've pre-selected my volunteer, Sean Lee, you can attest to the fact that we have not pre-planned when you're going to ring the bell or what I'm going to say, correct? Now some of you may not believe her because you don't know her like I do. So I'm going to prove this is improvised by getting a suggestion from you that I have to incorporate. So how about an occupation? Call out some types of jobs. Chiropractor, all right. Congratulations, sir, you have the loudest voice in the room. So, I'm going to now tell you a story involving a chiropractor. Are you ready? Once upon a time, there was a man named Bill who was a chiropractor, and every day he would see patients who were in tons of pain. Every day he would see patients who had no pain because he was a bad chiropractor. Every day he would put patients into pain so they'd have to pay him more money. They'd come into his office and he'd break their backs. They'd come into his office and he'd kiss them on the lips, and they'd be so shocked they would fall backwards and get in pain. So they would be so shocked they'd smack him in the face. And what he would then do is he would say, "Look, I'm going to sue you for hitting me." He said, "I'm going to fall in love with you for kissing me so lovely." He said, "I am going to cry to my mommy because not only my bed." He said, "I am going to go hide in the woods." So he went and hid in the woods, but then he realized this is a bad way to be a chiropractor. He realized that, wow, I should go fishing because my chiropractor skills will help me. He figured if he could break a back, he could easily kill a fish with his bare hands. And, all right, that's about as far as I can go with that one. So, thank you. Let's give Sean Lee another round of applause. Awesome job. Thank you. Forgot to mention, sometimes those stories don't always end. You just kind of stop. So that's an example of improv comedy. And right now, some of you might be really confused as to why on earth I think the world needs more of that. What could that possibly have to do with you and your lives, jobs, careers, businesses? Well, if so, I invite you to think about one thing. Life isn't scripted. No matter how much we want it to be with our plans and visualizations and goals and agendas and to-do lists, life is the ultimate improvisation. And just when you think you've got it all figured out, the universe comes along and goes, ding, now deal with this. Or, as I like to say, sometimes ding happens. And what I have found that while planning is important and a useful tool, what ultimately separates people who succeed from those who struggle is not how well they plan, but rather how quickly and effectively they improvise and adapt to those ding moments when they occur, because they will. Anyone can do well when everything goes right. The real test is how you respond when things go wrong, when something happens that you could never have planned for. The world needs improv now more than ever simply because the world is changing faster than ever. Consider the S&P 500, the stock market index fund. A consultant named Richard Foster did an analysis of that index. He found that in 1958, a company on the S&P 500 would stay on for an average of 61 years. In 2013, that number had dropped to 18 years. That is a 70% drop in the stability of the S&P 500, solely based on the fact that the world is changing and some organizations don't keep up. If you don't change with the times, you risk becoming irrelevant. And this is true for organizations and individuals, right? For organizations, you don't have to look any farther than a little company named Kodak to see what happens when you don't change and adapt. Now, it's sad if you think about the number of lives that were turned over, right? People lost jobs and investors lost money, all because a company refused to adapt when the world around them changed. On an individual level, I think this rigidity, this lack of ability to flow and change with the unexpected, is what leads to conflict and stress and to people settling for less than they want and deserve. I'm passionate about this topic because I obviously love improv comedy, but I also went through a period of my life where I almost was willing to settle for something way less than I wanted and deserved simply because I didn't want things to change. See, a few years back, I was in a relationship, and it was great. She was great. We got along great. We liked each other. We loved each other. Problem is, we had some long-term compatibility issues. It's going to make it really hard for us to get married and raise a family, which is important to both of us. Really good in the short term, really bad for the long term, kind of like eating a lot of fast food. If you see her, don't tell her I said that. So we tried to work it out for a little while, but then one day she came to me and said, Avish, I think it's time for us to break up so we can each find someone more suited for us. And that hurt, and it made me sad, but I knew it was the right thing to do, and so we agreed, we broke up, it was friendly, and I was fine with it. Until a few weeks went by, and then I started to miss her. And then that little voice in the back of my head started talking to me. You know that voice? That says things like, well, maybe you could make it work. Maybe you shouldn't have broken up. Maybe you can get back together. Now, if you've ever been in this situation, you know it's a bad mental headspace to be in because you start doing things you really shouldn't be doing, like writing and sending long, emotional emails, making phone calls at hours of the night people should not make phone calls, putting together mixtapes. Yes, I put together a mixtape. Now, by the way, for those of you in the audience who might be in this situation, tempted to put together a mixtape, let me tell you, don't do it. They don't work. There has never been a breakup in the history of relationships where two people have gotten back together because one person put together an awesome mixtape for the other. Right? It's never, Phil Collins, our love is against all odds. Like, don't do it. Doesn't work. Fortunately, my situation was no different. We did not end up getting back together. And it worked out so much better for me because a little while later, I met someone far more compatible for me. We got together, we got married, and just literally less than 3 months ago, welcomed our first child into the world. Thank you. That is what we in the speaking business call getting cheap applause. So thank you for playing along. So it worked out so much better for me, but in that moment, I didn't care that there was something better out there for me. All I knew was that ding had happened, things had changed, I didn't like it, and I just wanted them to go back to the way they were before. And this is what we do, whether as individuals or organizations, all the time when ding happens or something changes around us. We want to get back to the way it was before. Right? We'd rather settle for a mediocre certainty than embrace an awesome uncertainty. Right? We'd rather stick to our original plan, even if that plan might lead to long-term disaster. So the first step in improvising more effectively is to stop making mixtapes. Right? Stop exerting time, energy, and resources trying to get back, trying to keep things the way they are, or trying to get back to a past that no longer exists. Now, that's easier said than done. So what I want to share with you right now is one principle from the world of improv comedy that can help you do this. It is simple, but it is incredibly powerful, and is probably the most universally accepted improv principle in the world. And it is to say yes and instead of yes but. In every moment, ding or otherwise, you have the option of saying yes and or yes but. Improvisers choose to respond with yes and. Think about those two little phrases. Yes, but, yes, and. Just one little difference, but versus and. But that one difference makes all the difference in your ability to improvise and flow with the unexpected. Think about yes, but, right, the little phrase. We hate when people respond to us with yes, but, right? You all know that person in your life, that negative, chronic yes, butter who feels like it's their job to tell you why every idea you come up with won't work. And if no one's jumping to mind immediately, it might be you. But you know, this is the person who you go to and like, hey, I'm thinking about applying for a new job. Yes, but in this market, no one's hiring. Hey, I'm thinking about starting a side business. Yes, but that's really risky. Hey, I'm thinking about talking to that woman. Yes, but she is way out of your league. We hate that person, right? Yes, but is negative. It can start fights and arguments. It deflates us, and it stops all forward progress. We'd rather the world respond to us with yes, and. Yes, and let me help you put together your resume. Yes, and I know someone in that space who might be able to give you some advice. Yes, and let me be your wingman. We want people to respond with yes, and. It's positive, it's collaborative, makes us feel good, and moves things forward. Now, I need to pause for a minute and address my realist friends in the room. Because right now, some of you are sitting there thinking, well, Avish, that sounds great for improv comedy, but in the real world, you can't say yes and to everything. You don't always agree. Sometimes you don't like the idea. And you're right. This is a mentality, not a literal technique. So I'm not suggesting that if like the office slacker comes to you and is like, hey, I haven't worked on this project for 3 weeks, can you do it for me? That you say yes and let me pick up your dry cleaning. And to the gentleman in the room, if your wife, girlfriend, significant other comes to you and says, does this make me look fat? Yes and old. Like, right? Okay, no. It is not a literal technique. It's a mentality. But what we're talking about here is ding moments and default responses. And so many people have the default response of when they're faced with something not in their plan, not in their expectation, or not in what they originally wanted, to immediately say yes, but. All I'm suggesting we do is change that default response to yes, and. You can always say yes, but, or no later. You can say no till your tongue bleeds. But all I'm suggesting is you first start with yes, and to consider. When you do that, it opens you up to opportunities you never would have seen otherwise. Think about it. When you say yes, but to a ding moment, you're basically making a mixtape. Yes, things have changed, but I don't want them to. Yes, things have changed, but why can't we just keep doing things the same way? You get nowhere, you make no progress. You don't innovate. When you say yes, and, you're able to respond to those ding moments much more effectively for two simple reasons. Number one, when you say yes, and, you are forced to accept what is and let go of what was. We have to accept the ding. We have to accept the change. Sounds obvious, but we all know people who struggle simply because when things change, they refuse to accept it. They put their head in the sand, they don't want to deal with it, they ignore the problem. And that is no way to deal with ding. And when you accept what is, you often end up having to let go of what was. And what was maybe your old plan, your old strategy, your old way of doing things. But only by letting go of the old can we move on to the new and innovate and move into new ground. You see this in improv comedy all the time, that letting go is hard to do. Like in that game I started with the story. A lot of times an improviser, an idea will pop in your head. This is going to be a great idea for this story. But then the bell rings. You got to change direction, and you have to let that idea go, no matter how good it seemed at the time. Now, you can always tell when an improviser is not letting go of an idea, they're kind of trying to force the story down a certain path, usually because it looks like really bad improv. So we have to accept what is, let go of what was. The second thing yes and forces you to do is to move forward, right? There's a difference between yes and yes and. Anyone can just say yes and not do anything. The and forces you to explore, to build, to be open-minded, and most importantly, to take a step. It doesn't have to be a giant step, and you don't have to have it all figured out before you move. In fact, with improvisation, you will not. All you have to do, though, is say yes and, take a step, see what happens, make an adjustment. Say yes and, take another step, see what happens, make an adjustment, and so on and so on. And that way, one step at a time, one yes and at a time, you're able to improvise with whatever happens and move things forward. You build something that was never there before, whether it's a story, an improvised scene, a marketing campaign, a social movement, a piece of software, a strong relationship, or just a great life. One step, one yes and, one improvisation at a time. The world needs improv. And now you know the one overriding principle that will help you improvise with any moment, and you know the one improv idea that you should be spreading to others. So I hope the next time ding happens to you, you stay flexible, you stay adaptable, you stop making mixtapes, you say yes and you improvise with that moment. Thank you.